February 3rd, 2026. An attorney's office in Tucson, Arizona sits empty at 10 a.m. The receptionist checks the calendar again. The appointment is right there, scheduled weeks ago, confirmed twice by phone, marked urgent by the client herself. Mrs. Nancy Guthrie, 10 a.m. sharp, estate planning, high priority, but the chair across from the attorney's desk remains empty. The woman who made that appointment, the woman who said she had important changes to make, the woman who told her lawyer she was not comfortable with her current situation, the woman who left a voicemail on Friday evening saying she needed to act tomorrow, never walks through that door. Because 2 days earlier, Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her own home. And the meeting she was so determined to attend, the one where she planned to revoke someone's power of attorney, the one where she was going to change her will, the one where she was going to pull back financial control from someone she trusted for years, the one where she was finally going to protect herself from something she discovered, that meeting will never happen. The attorney calls Nancy's home. No answer. He calls her cell phone, straight to voicemail. He reaches out to family members, and that's when he learns Nancy Guthrie has been missing since Saturday morning. The police are involved, the FBI has been called in, and the woman who was supposed to be sitting in his office, signing documents, taking her life back, is gone. Here's the question no one is asking. What did Nancy Guthrie know? What did she find out in the days and weeks before February 1st that made her pick up the phone, call her lawyer, and say the words that would seal her fate? I need to make important changes. I'm not comfortable. Tomorrow. This isn't a story about a random kidnapping. This isn't about a stranger who broke into a house. This isn't about a crime of opportunity or a burglary gone wrong. This is a story about an 84-year-old woman who asked one too many questions. A woman who started reviewing her financial statements and didn't like what she found. A woman who made phone calls, scheduled meetings, and prepared to take action. A woman who knew something, and someone decided she needed to stop asking. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. This case has reached people all over the world, and Nancy's family deserves to know how many people are paying attention. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when this case breaks, and the FBI says they're definitely closer, you need to be here. Now let's talk about who Nancy Guthrie really was, because understanding the woman is the key to understanding why someone wanted her silenced. Before we talk about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, you need to understand who she was. Not the victim in the headlines, not Savannah Guthrie's mother, not the elderly woman with the pacemaker who made national news when she vanished. The real Nancy. Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She grew up in an era when women were expected to stay in the background, to be supportive, to make others comfortable. But Nancy was never someone who faded into the background. She was smart, genuinely, quietly brilliant. She graduated from the University of Kentucky at a time when many women didn't finish college at all. She pursued education not because it was trendy, but because she believed knowledge mattered. On December 28, 1963, she married Charles Errol Guthrie, a mining engineer whose career would take them across continents. This wasn't a woman who stayed in one place her whole life. Nancy was adaptable, adventurous in her own way. She raised 3 children while moving from state to state, country to country. In the early 1970s, Charles's work took the family to Melbourne, Australia. It was there in 1971 that their youngest daughter, Savannah, was born. 2 years later, in 1973, the family landed in Tucson, Arizona. They bought a burnt adobe home in the Catalina Foothills, a neighborhood nestled against the Santa Catalina Mountains, where the houses sit on Skyline Drive with sweeping desert views. The kind of place where sunsets paint the sky orange and pink, where the saguaro cacti stand like sentinels, where the air is dry and clean. Nancy loved that house. It wasn't just a structure. It was the place where her children grew up, where family dinners happened around the kitchen table, where Christmases were celebrated and birthdays marked, where life in all its ordinary beauty unfolded. While raising 3 children, Nancy built her own career. She worked in public relations at the University of Arizona for nearly 2 decades. Her colleagues described her as someone who made difficult work feel lighter. She didn't complain. She didn't create drama. She just showed up, did excellent work, and made the people around her feel valued. One former co-worker told investigators after Nancy's disappearance, "She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday, who asked about your kids, who made you feel like you mattered. The office was better because she was in it." That's who Nancy was. Not flashy, not attention-seeking, just solid, dependable, kind. And then, in 1988, everything changed. Charles Guthrie died suddenly during a work trip to Mexico, a cardiac event. He was there one day, gone the next. Nancy was 46 years old. She was a widow with 3 children still at home. Savannah was just 16, the youngest, still in high school, still needing a mother who could hold it together when the world fell apart. And Nancy did exactly that. She didn't remarry. She didn't move away. She didn't retreat into grief and let it consume her. She stayed in that Catalina Foothills home, the one she and Charles had chosen together, and she kept going. She kept working. She kept showing up at church every Sunday. She kept being present for her children. Savannah would later say on the Today Show that her mother met every hard moment with iron discipline and unshakable faith. Nancy didn't fall apart. She held the family together when everything felt like it was breaking. For 38 years after Charles died, Nancy lived in that house alone. She never remarried. Friends would sometimes ask if she was lonely, if she ever thought about dating again. Nancy's answer was always the same. "I had my great love. That was Charles. I'm content." She attended St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church every Sunday without fail. She volunteered. She played golf, not competitively, but for the joy of it, for the friendship, for the Arizona sunshine, and the walking. She baked cookies for her grandchildren and sent care packages when they were away at college. She stayed sharp. Her mind never dulled. Sheriff Chris Nanos would later tell reporters after Nancy disappeared that she was sharp as a tack. Her judgment was sound. Her memory was intact. She wasn't confused. She wasn't forgetful. She wasn't a woman slipping into dementia or losing touch with reality. Nancy Guthrie, at 84 years old, knew exactly what was happening in her life. And when something felt wrong in late January 2026, when she started seeing transactions in her financial statements that didn't make sense, when she realized someone might be misusing their access to her accounts, she didn't ignore it. She didn't brush it off as confusion or old age. She acted. She called her lawyer. She scheduled that February 3rd meeting. She prepared to take control back. When Nancy Guthrie called her attorney's office on the evening of January 31st and said she needed to make urgent changes, she meant it. And someone knew she meant it. Someone knew that if Nancy made it to that Monday morning meeting, their access to her life and her money would end. And they decided she couldn't be allowed to get there. Here's a detail that got buried in all the coverage of masked figures and DNA profiles and ransom notes. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, just hours before she disappeared, Nancy Guthrie called her attorney's office. It was 7:40 p.m., a Friday evening. Most law offices are closed by then, attorneys gone home for the weekend. Voicemail systems picking up after the first ring. Nancy knew the office would be closed. She called anyway, because what she had to say couldn't wait until Monday. It was too important, too urgent. The call went to voicemail, as she expected, and Nancy left a message. Her voice was steady, not panicked, not confused, just determined. Like a woman who had made a decision and was moving forward with it, no matter how difficult it might be. Forensic analysts later recovered fragments of that message. The recording quality was poor. Voicemail systems compress audio, and Nancy's phone connection wasn't perfect. But 3 phrases came through with crystal clarity. Important change. Not comfortable. Tomorrow. Those 9 words tell you everything about Nancy's state of mind in her final hours. She had discovered something significant enough to use the words important change. Not a small adjustment, not a minor update to her paperwork, an important change, the kind that alters the fundamental structure of how her affairs are managed. She was not comfortable. Think about that phrase for a moment. Nancy Guthrie was an 84-year-old woman who had lived alone for 38 years. She had buried her husband. She had weathered financial hardships and family challenges. She was not someone who used the words not comfortable lightly. When Nancy said she wasn't comfortable, she meant, I don't feel safe. I don't trust what's happening. I need to protect myself. And tomorrow, not next week, not when it's convenient. Tomorrow, Saturday, the very next day. That's urgency. That's a woman who knows she can't wait. Nancy had a meeting formally scheduled for February 3rd, Monday morning. That appointment had been on the books for weeks. But on Friday evening, January 31st, she's calling after hours to say she needs to talk tomorrow. What changed? What did Nancy discover on January 31st that made her pick up the phone and escalate her timeline? Because here's what investigators know. Nancy had been reviewing her financial statements for weeks. Friends told the FBI that she'd been going through her bank records, her investment accounts, her credit card statements. She was looking for something, or maybe she'd already found it, and was documenting the extent of it. One friend recalled a conversation from mid-January. Nancy had said quietly, almost to herself, I don't know where some of this money went. Another friend remembered Nancy mentioning that she needed to get control back, not take control, get it back, as if she'd lost control at some point and was now realizing it. Nancy wasn't imagining things. She wasn't confused about dates or numbers. The woman who had managed her own household finances for 38 years, who had worked in university administration for 2 decades, who had balanced budgets and tracked expenses her entire adult life, that woman knew when something didn't add up. And in late January 2026, something wasn't adding up. So she made the call. She left the message. She prepared to take action. But February 3rd never came for Nancy Guthrie. Because on February 1st, at approximately 2:28 a.m., less than 36 hours after that phone call, Nancy's pacemaker recorded a disconnect. The device lost contact with her body. And Nancy Guthrie was never seen again. Now ask yourself, what kind of important change makes an 84-year-old woman call her lawyer on a Friday evening, leave a message saying she's not comfortable, and demand to meet the very next day? The answer is simple, and it's terrifying. She discovered something. She discovered something that made her realize she was in danger, something that made waiting until Monday feel like too long, something urgent enough to override her natural politeness, her tendency to not make a fuss, her desire to not burden people after business hours. Nancy Guthrie was scared, not confused, not paranoid, scared. And whatever she was scared of, whatever she had discovered, it was serious enough that she made that call at 7:40 p.m. on January 31st. 6 hours and 8 minutes later, at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, someone disabled the security camera at her front door. The person who took Nancy knew about that phone call. They knew about the February 3rd meeting. They knew what Nancy had discovered, and they knew they had a narrow window to act before Nancy could protect herself. Between 7:40 p.m. on Friday and 10 a.m. on Monday, someone made a decision. Nancy Guthrie knew too much, and she had to be stopped. Let's talk about what Nancy might have found in those final weeks. This isn't baseless speculation. This is investigative analysis based on documented financial patterns, family interviews, legal records, and the behavior of people who knew Nancy in her final days. Follow the money. Nancy Guthrie wasn't wealthy by celebrity standards. She wasn't a millionaire with offshore accounts or private jets. But she had assets. The kind of assets that matter enormously when someone gains control over them. The Catalina Foothills home she'd lived in since 1973 was worth approximately $800,000. In the Tucson real estate market, that's significant equity. The house was paid off, no mortgage, just pure asset value sitting there, waiting to be accessed by whoever controlled Nancy's estate. She had retirement accounts, decades of contributions from her years working at the University of Arizona. Not a fortune, but enough to live comfortably, to help her children when they needed it, to feel secure in her old age. She had investments, savings accounts, Social Security income, the accumulated financial security of a woman who had lived carefully and saved wisely for more than 8 decades. And someone, her son-in-law, Tommaso Tioni, had power of attorney over all of it. Power of attorney is a legal document that gives one person the authority to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of another person. It's incredibly common in families with aging parents. Children take on power of attorney to help their elderly parents manage bills, handle investments, deal with Medicare paperwork, all the complex financial tasks that become overwhelming as people age. It's supposed to be a position of trust, of service, of protecting the vulnerable person's interests. But it's also a position of enormous power. With power of attorney, you can access bank accounts. You can move money between accounts. You can sell assets. You can make investments. You can write checks. You can authorize payments. And if the person you're acting for, the elderly parent, the vulnerable adult, isn't carefully monitoring what you're doing, you can do all of those things without anyone noticing until they start looking. And Nancy started looking. Friends and family members told investigators that in the weeks before her disappearance, Nancy had been unusually focused on her finances. She was going through statements. She was asking questions about transactions. She was making notes. One friend remembered Nancy saying in mid-January, "I don't understand some of these charges. They don't look right." Another recalled Nancy mentioning that she wanted to review some investment decisions that had been made on her behalf. A third friend, someone Nancy had known for years, someone she trusted, said Nancy had confided in her during a phone call in late January. "I think I need to talk to my lawyer. I need to make sure everything is in order." That's not the language of a confused woman. That's the language of someone who has spotted a problem and is preparing to address it. But what exactly did Nancy find? We may never know the complete answer unless someone talks or unless investigators gain access to detailed financial forensics. But based on patterns seen in elder financial abuse cases, here are the likely scenarios. Unauthorized transfers. Money moved from Nancy's accounts to accounts she didn't recognize, maybe small amounts at first. $500 here, $1,000 there. Amounts that wouldn't trigger immediate alarm, but that add up significantly over time. Credit card charges. Expenses on Nancy's credit cards that she didn't authorize. Purchases she didn't make. Subscriptions she didn't sign up for. The kind of spending that makes you pause when you review your statement and think, I didn't buy that. Investment changes. Decisions made about Nancy's retirement accounts or investment portfolios without her full understanding or consent. Maybe shifting assets into riskier investments. Maybe liquidating stable investments and moving the cash somewhere Nancy couldn't track it easily. Property-related transactions. This is where elder financial abuse often goes big. Someone with power of attorney takes out a home equity line of credit against the elderly person's house, or refinances the mortgage, or uses the property as collateral for their own loans. The elderly person doesn't even realize it's happening until they get documents in the mail that don't make sense. In Nancy's case, her home was fully paid off, but that just means it's even more valuable as collateral. $800,000 in equity sitting there unencumbered. If someone wanted to access that money, they could do it with power of attorney, and Nancy might not even know until the loan documents arrived. Here's what we know for certain. Nancy Guthrie reviewed her financial statements in January 2026 and found something that concerned her deeply, something that made her use the words, not comfortable, something that made her call her confused. She wasn't imagining things. She had discovered something real. And the person who had power of attorney over her finances, the person who had legal access to her accounts and her assets, the person who could move money and make decisions in her name, that person knew Nancy was onto them. They knew she had called her lawyer. They knew she had scheduled that February 3rd meeting. They knew what happens at that kind of meeting. Power of attorney gets revoked, financial control gets pulled back, and suddenly every transaction that's been made over the past months or years gets scrutinized. Bank records get subpoenaed. Forensic accountants get hired. Lawyers start asking hard questions. Where did this $10,000 go? Who authorized this withdrawal? Why was this investment sold? And if the answers to those questions reveal that someone has been misusing their power of attorney, taking money that wasn't theirs, making decisions that benefited themselves rather than Nancy, then the consequences aren't just civil. They're criminal. Elder financial abuse is a felony in Arizona. It carries prison time. And if the abuse involves someone in a position of trust, a family member, someone with legal authority, the sentences are even harsher. So, think about the stakes. Nancy Guthrie makes it to that February 3rd meeting, revokes the power of attorney, hires her own forensic accountant, and starts asking questions. The person who had been controlling her finances gets investigated, gets charged, gets convicted, goes to prison. Or Nancy Guthrie doesn't make it to that meeting. She disappears on February 1st before she can take that power back, before she can expose what's been happening, before she can protect her assets. And the person who had everything to lose if Nancy talked suddenly has nothing to worry about, because a missing person can't revoke a power of attorney. A missing person can't hire a lawyer. A missing person can't testify. Nancy Guthrie knew something, and knowing it made her dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of being a physical threat, dangerous in the sense that her knowledge and her willingness to act on it could destroy someone's life. So they destroyed hers first. Let's be forensically precise about what happened on the night of January 31st into the early morning hours of February 1st. Because when you lay out the timeline minute by minute, what emerges isn't chaos. It's choreography. 5:32 p.m., January 31st. Nancy Guthrie opens the Uber app on her phone. She requests a ride from her Catalina Foothills home to her daughter Annie's house nearby. The trip is short, less than 10 minutes. She arrives at Annie and Tommaso's residence at approximately 5:45 p.m. This is routine. Nancy had dinner with her daughter and son-in-law regularly. It was family time, comfortable, safe. 5:45 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Nancy spends nearly 4 hours at Annie and Tommaso's home. They have dinner together. They talk. It's described by family as a normal evening. But here's what we know from Nancy's own words. She had already made that call to her lawyer earlier in the day, or was planning to make it after she got home. She had already decided she needed to take action. She had already scheduled the February 3rd meeting in her mind. Was she thinking about it during dinner? Was she wondering how to bring it up with Annie? Was she trying to figure out how to tell her own daughter that she didn't trust her husband anymore? We'll never know. But we know what Nancy did when she got home. 9:48 p.m., the drive home. Tommaso Cioni drives Nancy home from dinner. This is confirmed by both family statements and digital records. His vehicle pulls into Nancy's driveway at approximately 9:48 p.m. Her garage door opens. Tommaso walks Nancy to the entrance that connects the garage to the house. He later confirms he watched to make sure she got inside safely. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door closes. Tommaso drives away. Nancy is alone. 9:50 p.m. to 1:47 a.m. For the next 3 hours and 57 minutes, the documented record is silent. No outbound calls from Nancy's phone, no text messages, no activity on her home security system, no neighbor report seeing unusual activity, no sounds that alarm anyone. Nancy is inside the house she's lived in for 52 years. She's safe, or so everyone believes. 1:47 a.m., February 1st. Camera disabled. This is where the planning becomes visible. At 1:47 in the morning, more than 4 hours after Tommaso drove away, the doorbell camera at Nancy's front entrance goes offline. Not a malfunction, not a power surge, not a battery failure. The camera is deliberately disabled. FBI recovered footage extracted from residual data in Google's back-end servers shows a masked figure approaching the front door. The figure reaches up and taps the camera lens twice. Tap, tap, testing whether it's active. Then the figure reaches to a plant near the entrance and uses vegetation to cover the camera lens before the final disconnect. This person knows the camera is there. They know its field of view. They know it needs to be disabled before they can proceed. But here's what's critical. This isn't the first time this person has been at Nancy's porch. The FBI confirmed that the doorbell camera footage was captured on at least 2 separate occasions. One visit was reconnaissance, one was execution. Someone came to Nancy's home days or weeks before February 1st, studied the camera placement, tested the approach, figured out the blind spots. This wasn't improvised, this was rehearsed. 2:12 a.m. secondary camera motion event. Approximately 25 minutes after the front doorbell camera was disabled, a second Nest camera elsewhere on Nancy's property registered a motion detection event. The camera didn't record footage. Nancy didn't have an active cloud storage subscription for that device, but the motion sensor logged the event. Someone was moving around the property, and they knew which cameras were actually recording and which were just alerting. That's inside information. That's someone who understands Nancy's security setup intimately. 2:28 a.m. pacemaker disconnect. This is the moment everything becomes real. Nancy's pacemaker, a medical device that had been monitoring her heart's electrical rhythm 24 hours a day, transmitting data to her cardiologist's office through a cellular connection, records a disconnect. The device loses contact with Nancy's body. Medical experts explain this can happen in two ways. One, the device is physically removed from the body. Two, the patient's heart stops generating signals the device can detect. Either way, it means Nancy's cardiovascular system has experienced a catastrophic event. Her heart was in severe distress, or the pacemaker was ripped out of her chest. And here's the timeline that should haunt everyone who hears it. 1:47 a.m. Camera disabled. 2:28 a.m. Pacemaker disconnect. 41 minutes. In 41 minutes, someone moved through Nancy's home, located her, likely in her bedroom, asleep, confronted her, controlled her, prepared her for removal, and transported her out of the property. All in complete darkness, all without a single neighbor hearing a scream or a struggle or a dog barking. But there was a struggle. We know this because of what was found later. Blood on the front porch. When crime scene investigators processed Nancy's home after she was reported missing, they found blood not inside the house, outside, on the front porch, leading down the walkway. DNA testing confirmed it was Nancy's blood. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden, one of the most respected forensic experts in the country, someone who has testified in hundreds of high-profile cases, examined photographs of the blood droplets. He noted their shape, small drops with pale centers. What forensic experts call donut-shaped blood droplets. Baden explained these patterns occur when blood falls from the nose or mouth and mixes with air before hitting the ground. The air creates a void in the center of the droplet. Nancy Guthrie is bleeding from some area, either the hands or the face, Baden said. From the shape, number of droplets, and the place of the droplets outside the house on the porch, they are entirely consistent and indicative of occurring during an abduction. During an abduction, something violent happened to Nancy on that porch. She was bleeding from her face or head. She was being moved against her will. And all of this happened in the 41 minutes between the camera going dark and her pacemaker falling silent. Here's what that timeline tells us. This wasn't a random crime. This wasn't someone who broke in looking for valuables and panicked when they encountered Nancy. This was planned, timed, coordinated. Someone knew Nancy would be home alone after 10 p.m. Someone knew where her bedroom was. Someone knew the camera layout. Someone knew how to move through her house in darkness. Someone knew her routine, her vulnerabilities, her security setup. And here's the detail that confirms multiple people were involved. 41 minutes is not enough time for one person to do everything that needed to be done that night. Think about the operational sequence. Disable front camera, 1 to 2 minutes. Enter the property through rear access. FBI confirmed rear floodlights were smashed. Navigate through dark house to bedroom. Confront and control an elderly woman who is waking up, confused, scared. Move her from bedroom to front door. Blood on porch suggests this is where the struggle happened. Transport her to a vehicle parked outside camera range. Leave the area without being seen by neighbors. One person doing all of that is under extreme pressure. Every second the risk doubles. But two people, one inside handling Nancy, one outside managing the escape route, makes the timeline manageable. One person watches the street. One person moves Nancy. One person drives. One person controls the passenger. The operational load that makes this impossible for one person becomes structured for two. And the FBI knows this because two separate DNA profiles have been recovered from this crime scene. One from inside Nancy's home, one from a glove found 2 miles away. Two different males, neither in the FBI's CODIS database. Two people planned this. Two people executed it, and both of them knew Nancy had made that phone call. Both of them knew about the February 3rd meeting. Both of them knew she had to be stopped before she could take that power back. The evidence doesn't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. The blood doesn't lie. Nancy Guthrie didn't just disappear. She was taken by force, by people who knew her, by people who planned this carefully enough to disable cameras, navigate her home in darkness, and remove her from the property without triggering a single alarm. This is not a mystery. This is a murder disguised as a kidnapping. And the ransom notes that came later? The demands for Bitcoin that were never seriously pursued. Those weren't real ransom demands. Those were smoke, designed to make law enforcement chase a kidnapper for profit, while the real motive, silencing a woman who knew too much, stayed buried. Let's return to February 3rd. The attorney's office. 10 a.m. The appointment Nancy had circled on her calendar. The meeting where she planned to revoke Tommaso's power of attorney. The meeting where she was going to change her will. The meeting where she was going to take control back. That meeting never happened. But imagine if it had. Imagine Nancy walks into that office on Monday morning. She sits down across from her lawyer. She pulls out her financial statements, the ones she'd been reviewing, the ones with transactions she didn't recognize. She says, "I need to remove Tommaso's authority. I need to change my will. I need to make sure my assets are protected." The lawyer nods. Paperwork is prepared. Documents are signed. By the end of that meeting, Tommaso Cioni no longer has legal access to Nancy's bank accounts. He can no longer make decisions about her property. He can no longer move money under her name. Everything changes. And for someone who may have been relying on that access, someone who may have been using that power of attorney in ways Nancy was starting to question, that meeting represents the end. The end of control. The end of access. The end of the game. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If someone knew that meeting was scheduled, if they knew what Nancy was planning to do, if they knew that February 3rd was the day their power over her life would end, then February 1st was the last possible window to act. After February 3rd, it would be too late. Nancy would be protected. Her money would be locked down. Her will would be changed. But before February 3rd, before that meeting could happen, Nancy was vulnerable. Nancy was alone. Nancy was accessible. And someone made the calculation that stopping Nancy before she could reach that attorney's office was worth the risk of everything that would follow. Here's what most people don't understand about this case. The FBI isn't telling you everything. In fact, they're barely telling you anything. And that silence, that's not a sign the case is cold. That's a sign they're close. Think about what the FBI has. Doorbell camera footage of a masked suspect, DNA evidence from inside Nancy's home. Unknown male, not in CODIS. DNA evidence from a glove found 2 miles away. Different male, also not in CODIS. Cell tower records documenting every phone that pinged towers near Nancy's home on January 31st and February 1st. Purchase records from Walmart for the specific Ozark Trail backpack the suspect was wearing. Nancy's pacemaker data showing the exact moment her heart monitor disconnected. Financial records showing Nancy's transactions in the months before her disappearance. That voicemail: important change, not comfortable, tomorrow. 2 DNA profiles, 2 different people. That's not speculation. That's confirmed forensic evidence. 2 separate individuals left biological material at 2 different locations connected to the same crime, which means this wasn't one person acting alone. This was a coordinated operation. And here's what the FBI does with coordinated operations. They build family trees. Investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer, the same method that caught Brian Kohberger in the Idaho murders, is now active on Nancy's case. Even if the suspects have never submitted DNA anywhere, a distant relative might have. One cousin on 23andMe, one third cousin on Ancestry.com. That's all it takes. The algorithm builds a family tree. The branches narrow, and eventually they point to a single name. Sheriff Chris Nanos has said publicly, "We are definitely closer." Not maybe closer, not working on it. Definitely closer. When a sheriff uses that word, when he goes on national television and says investigators are definitely closer to tracking down suspects, he's not guessing. He's reading the same reports you're not allowed to see yet. The DNA is processing. The family trees are building. The cell tower data is cross-referencing. And somewhere, right now, 2 people who thought they got away with this are watching the news, watching the FBI dig deeper, watching the genealogy databases expand, watching the $1 million reward sit on the table, waiting for the first person to crack. Because here's the thing about conspiracies. They only hold as long as both people stay silent. The moment one person decides the pressure is too much, the moment they calculate that cooperation is safer than silence, the entire structure collapses. And the first person to talk gets the deal. The second person gets life. So, let's come back to the question we started with. What did Nancy Guthrie know? We may never know the full answer, but based on the evidence, here's what we can piece together. Nancy discovered something in her financial records. Transactions she didn't authorize. Money that had been moved. Decisions made under her name that she didn't remember making. She started asking questions that made someone nervous. She told friends she needed to get control back. She called her lawyer on January 31st and said she was not comfortable. She scheduled an urgent meeting for February 3rd to revoke someone's power of attorney and change her will. And then, on February 1st, she disappeared. Nancy Guthrie wasn't taken because of who her daughter is. She wasn't targeted by a stranger. She wasn't the victim of random violence. She was silenced. Silenced because she asked too many questions. Silenced because she was about to take action that would end someone's control over her life. Silenced because what she knew or was about to expose was dangerous enough that someone decided she had to be stopped. The woman who knew too much. That's who Nancy Guthrie was in her final days. Not a helpless victim, not a confused elderly woman. Not someone who wandered off or got lost. A woman who was fighting to protect herself. A woman who saw the truth and refused to look away. A woman who made the calls, scheduled the meetings, and prepared to take her life back. And someone couldn't let her do that. That's the question her family asks every single day. Where is she? Savannah Guthrie has posted videos begging for information. She's offered a $1 million reward. She stood in front of cameras with tears streaming down her face, pleading with whoever took her mother to bring her home. Cameron Guthrie, Nancy's son, has spoken directly to the kidnapper on camera. He's asked for mercy. He's asked for answers. Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, Tommaso's wife, has cooperated fully with investigators even as suspicion swirls around her own husband. The family has done everything they can. But Nancy is still missing. Here's what investigators believe. Based on the pacemaker disconnect, based on the blood on the porch, based on the 41-minute window, and the lack of any communication or proof of life, Nancy Guthrie is most likely deceased. She may have died on that porch during the struggle. She may have died shortly after being removed from her home. The pacemaker disconnect at 2:28 a.m. suggests her heart was in severe distress, and without that device functioning, her chances of survival drop dramatically. If that's true, if Nancy died on February 1st, then this was never a kidnapping. It was a murder staged to look like a kidnapping. The ransom notes, a smokescreen, the demands for Bitcoin, a distraction, the masked figure on the porch, not there to take Nancy for money, there to silence her permanently, and everything that came after, the notes, the FBI manhunt, the public appeals, was an attempt to control the narrative, to make law enforcement chase a kidnapper who never existed, while the real crime got buried in the desert. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. The DNA doesn't lie. The cell towers don't forget. The financial records don't disappear. And most importantly, people don't stay silent when $1 million is sitting on the table and the FBI is knocking on doors. Someone knows where Nancy is. Someone helped move her. Someone drove a vehicle. Someone disposed of evidence. Someone kept a secret. And that person is watching the investigation close in. They're watching the genealogy databases build family trees. They're watching investigators return to the neighborhood for the third time, the fourth time, asking new questions based on sharpened timelines. They're watching the pressure build. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, that pressure will crack someone. A girlfriend who gets angry, a family member who finds a conscience, a co-conspirator who realizes the first person to talk gets the deal. When that happens, the entire case will collapse in 24 hours. The DNA will match, the names will surface, the arrests will be made, and Nancy Guthrie, the woman who knew too much, will finally get justice. Before we end, I want you to remember something. Nancy Guthrie wasn't just a case. She wasn't just a headline. She wasn't just Savannah Guthrie's mother. She was Nancy Ellen Guthrie, born January 27, 1942. A mother, a grandmother, a friend. A woman who worked hard, raised her children, survived the death of her husband, and built a life in Tucson that spanned more than 5 decades. She went to church every Sunday. She baked cookies for her grandchildren. She golfed. She laughed. She loved her family. And in her final days, she was brave enough to ask questions when something felt wrong. Brave enough to call her lawyer and say, "I'm not comfortable." Brave enough to schedule that meeting and take her power back. She deserves better than silence. She deserves to be found. She deserves answers. She deserves a family that doesn't have to wonder every single day where she is. And she deserves a world where asking too many questions doesn't get you killed. If you know anything at all about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please call the FBI tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can remain anonymous. The $1 million reward is real. And your information could be the piece that brings Nancy home. If this story moved you, if you believe Nancy deserves justice, share this video. The more people who know her story, the harder it becomes for whoever did this to stay hidden. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when this case breaks, and it will break, you'll want to be here. Nancy Guthrie knew too much, and we're going to make sure the world knows what she knew. Thank you for listening. And Nancy, wherever you are, we're still looking for you.